right, happy Saturday. I'm like 30 minutes late because I'm trying to get my shit together, so if you've been waiting on me, thank you for your patience. Yeah, so it's Saturday, and it's been a week, right? It's definitely been a week. We talked a little last night. We did a little bit of shadow session, dealing specifically with how the shadow self or shadow obstacles may be amplified during the full moon, which was also a lunar eclipse, because that just is like layers upon layers of complications, right? So we're continuing the conversation of the shadow self, right? And how do the dark parts of ourself, our persona, our memories, our fears, the things we're ashamed of about ourselves, how do those hold us back? How can we overcome them? How might they be affecting our lives? So, last night we explored how specifically the full moon and the lunar eclipse are going to potentially impact that energy. And the message was fairly clear that you're going to feel compelled to act, right? Normally during a full moon. However, the shadow self may be sitting back waiting for someone else to take action. And when it comes to your own life and your own concerns, your relationships, your job, your family, the things that you want out of life, nobody has your best interest at heart more than you do. So waiting for someone else to give you that promotion, to come talk to you that you want to talk to find you the perfect house, whatever it is that you're pursuing in life right now, to implement social change, right? We all have to be involved. We can't sit back and wait for someone else to do it. We can't be complacent, on many levels, personally and as a society. So that was what we talked about last night. But this morning, the question I'm dealing specifically with is, how might the shadow self interfere with our creative selves? Typically, the full moon is a really potent creative force. During full moon energy, if you are attuned to it and you are particularly sensitive, you probably feel very inspired and creative. You probably feel like there are ideas just, popping up in your head. Shit's blowing everywhere. I'm not mad about this window because it's actually pretty fucking hot outside. You're typically in flow, right? You're getting, hey Rachel, I love you too. You are perceptive and you're open and you're receiving all of that inspiration and perhaps even turning it into things, right? You're writing, you are creating, you're painting, you're doing photography, you are a dancer, you are a singer, whatever it is that you do, whatever your creative pursuit is, whether it's physically making things or, creating things digitally, putting things out into the world, doing things that inspire other people, okay? Typically we get that energy on a full moon. And some people, however, are struggling with feeling blocked or not feeling creative when they normally would. And so the question that we're looking at today is, how might our shadow selves be interfering with our creative selves? Okay, so if you're in that, I feel blocked, I don't feel inspired, I really want to make things, I want to inspire other people, I want to put art and beauty out into the world, but I don't know how, or I just don't know what to do right now, okay? So first, this is our shadow self, how it may be showing up right now, right, for blocking our creative self. So the Two of Swords. So if you take a look in the picture here, in her reflection, you see just her, right? She's got the two swords. Twos typically represent a choice, right? There's two paths you can go down. There's two things you're trying to decide between, but not necessarily always. They can also represent duality, right? And there's duality all around us. Dark and light, male and female, right and left, all of that at all times is going on, right? Duality exists and it always will exist, okay? But if you look in the picture, so you can see that she's blindfolded. So she has, and this is this is the perfect card for being creatively blocked, personally. She can't see. She has blindfolded herself. She can't see her opportunities, her surroundings, her environment. She's looking inward, right? And what she's seeing inward are these monsters, right? She's in the dark woods. She's surrounded by these monsters. They are essentially the devils of self-criticism, right? And they are in her mind, because if you take a look at the reflection, none of that exists, right? It's just her. So what she's done is she's created this entire paradigm in which she exists, where she's saying, no, these dark things exist. I'm afraid of this. What if, so essentially what this card is telling us is our shadow self is showing up as self-limiting thoughts and beliefs. This is self-doubt. And to be quite honest, before I even drew this card, I was like, I guarantee the message is going to be self-limiting thoughts and beliefs, right? Whenever you're not feeling creative, it's not that there's a lack of inspiring and creative things around you. It's that voice in your head is telling you, nobody wants to read that. That's a stupid story to write, or that's an ugly thing to paint, or nobody would buy that, whatever it is that you want to create, right? That's your shadow self. That's your self-limiting thoughts and beliefs. And then how else this also appears is fearing judgment, right? So the duality, again, back to the subject of twos and duality, another duality that exists is yourself, right? Your true self, and then the self that you present to society, that you think society wants to see, right? And that self is the fear limited self, right? The self that's limited by those beliefs and fears. And so what this is telling us is that self exists in your mind only, right? Those fears exist in your mind only. You have created those fears. You have created those barriers, those obstacles, those limitations, out of fear for what other people will think about you, out of fear of failure. This is huge, and especially women listening. Every single study that's ever done on, they look at little girls and little boys, right? From childhood on up, fear of failure is something that is baked into women from a very young age. We are convinced that we can't go take that risk, that we're not good enough, that women don't do that, right? And what's great is this generation of kids that's growing up, like my son's generation and younger, there hasn't been as much of that. We see girls wanting to go into educational and professional pursuits that generations before them typically would not have initially considered, because they're not things that women tend to do or that they think they can do, right? So there's that gender paradigm of this too, of that self-limiting thought and belief. But essentially this is that retreat into the self. And that is where we come up with these fears, right? We sit there and we think about how, well, I failed that one time, I'm probably going to fail again. So fucking what? Look at some of the world's most famous or wealthy or successful creators and inventors, and most of them failed many, many, many times. Read the story of Richard Branson. If you ever get a chance, any of his books are wonderful. How many times he failed and how many businesses he started, even after succeeding and starting a relatively successful business. How many businesses did the Virgin brand start and they failed, right? But he's still an incredibly successful person. So one failure doesn't make you a failure. Something you didn't turn out right, but that doesn't mean that you're not great, right? That you're not going to be a success. So are you looking inward, and are you responding to those internal circumstances, right? Or are you creating internal circumstances to respond to external circumstances? So that's how the shadow self may be showing up to interfere with your creative self right now, right? Okay, so then second, how do we overcome that? What can we do about it? Where do we need to go, right, mentally to get away from that? So I'm using the occult tarot deck here with the goetic demons, and this card, one of resonates most with the Eight of Wands. Okay, now if you remember from last night, the Eight of Wands actually popped up in our question, and it was in our spread for what might be amplified, how might our shadow self be amplified, right? So now here with this card popping up in the what do we do about this shadow element that could be holding us back from our creative selves or holding our creative selves back, when we think about the Eight of Wands energy, right? Wands are creative, they're inspired, which is duh, like why wouldn't this card show up, right? Creative, inspired, passionate. They can be that fiery emotion. They can be that kind of impulse. It's more, so the cups are more of your emotional self, but wands are more of a, like an impulse, right? Just a reaction to something. You are heading in there and you're just gonna do it, right? You're inspired, okay? So on the subject of that, how this fits into what do we do about that self-limiting thoughts and belief blocking our creative self, liberate your desires, okay? Whatever that desire is inside of yourself, whatever it is you want to be, let it the fuck out, right? If you're sitting there and you are suppressing that and hiding it because you are afraid of being judged, of course you're not going to feel inspired. Of course you're going to feel uncreative. And that shadow self is going to keep doing that until you confront it, right? And the entire point of these shadow sessions is to recognize the shadow exists, right? Confront it and then accept it, right? And stop letting it limit us. We don't want to destroy the shadow. It's part of ourself. It is our collective experience, all of the things that we've gone through. So we don't want to destroy that because it makes us who we are, but we want to accept it. So essentially that, again, this is our what do we do about it. What is your end goal, right? So this inspired or creative self and this project or whatever this idea is that comes to you, what is the end goal of it? What do you want? Is it something you want to publish? Is it a work of art you want to collaborate with somebody? Is it a new venture, right? Like a new business. Maybe you want to take a completely different direction with your life and you're tired of being uncreative, right, in your career, and now is the perfect time, right? Everything is in upheaval. The new moon and the lunar eclipse are transformative. It is the perfect energy to take advantage of a transformation, right? So know what your end goal is and then put that desire out into the world. Be open about that desire. Let the people around you know, like, look, this is what I want. Speak your truth. Because your fear that you will be judged exists in here. And if someone judges you or someone doesn't get it, that's fine. They're not you. They don't live your life. They don't pay your bills. Unless you're like 12 and you're listening to this and they're your parents, they pay your bills, but it's still not their life, right? So don't let anybody who doesn't directly impact your quality of life, actually, honestly, don't let anybody hold you back from whatever that creative pursuit or endeavor is that you're looking for, okay? So again, just to summarize, the shadow self showing up as far as like interfering with our creative self right now is self-limiting thoughts and beliefs. We've created these monsters and fears in our head, right? But they don't exist around us, okay? And put those desires out into the world, right? Send that energy forth. Expose yourself. Be vulnerable, right? This is vulnerability, all right? So I also promised that we would take a look at a new deck. So last weekend, I spent some time talking about how tarot decks are whitewashed. Let's be real. And this is something that I've felt for some time, and frankly, there's no better time to talk about this than now, when we're seeking racial justice and equality across the world. What started as a movement in the United States quickly caught fire, and we see nations all over the world supporting this, and the young people, especially the young people. I'm excited. I know that people feel like this is a time of upheaval. There are awful things going on. People are dying. And that is true. I'm not excited about that part. I am excited to see what we will build when we break down the oppressive systems that previous generations have built. All right, so I thought I would have 2 decks to go through today, but the other one hasn't arrived yet. It has been shipped, but it has not arrived for me. Okay, so this deck, this is the Ancestral Path Tarot. And this deck actually, I think, was originally published in the early 2000s, and then it went out of print. So you couldn't really find it. Then all of a sudden it popped back up on Amazon. So I snapped up a copy. And then the second one, which I should have probably sometime, hopefully by next weekend, I'll jump back on here, by the same creator, Julie Cuccia-Watts. It's called Maat Tarot, M-A-A-T. And so what I'm specifically talking about is inclusivity of diverse ethnic groups and as well as beliefs, right? And traditions, cultures in tarot. Some of the prettiest tarot decks that I come across, I'm like, oh wow, the art's great, the images are amazing. I mean, matter of fact, the Darkwood Tarot, the one I use for my shadow readings, this is a whitewash deck. There's not much ethnic diversity in it. So, you know, I like the deck for its shadow purposes. It works very well for that, but it's not the deck I use for standard readings because it's not inclusive. And so I do have a blog that I posted, I believe it was like last weekend, called Tarot Decks Are Whitewashed and What You Can Do About It. So you can go back and look on my timeline, and you can also go to the blog link in my profile and you can read that. I've actually compiled a list of at least a couple dozen decks that are ethnically diverse and inclusive. And if you have suggestions for anything that's not on that list, I'm totally open to hearing it. So here we go. I'm not going to go through the whole thing. Now, the first, also, I'm not a super big fan of like abnormally shaped or sized decks. So I tend to like the standard size. You can kind of see how they compare. These abnormally sized ones tend to be a little more awkward to handle as far as shuffling and things like that, but I do still like them. I think that, you know, it's a worthy cause to support as far as the inclusivity and diversity aspect of it. And so the Fool, this is actually the creator. This is a self-portrait of the creator, which is kind of an interesting concept to put on that card. So you can see, I'll try not to block the card titles. And what's great is she's incorporated personas and archetypes across not just like, again, back to the concept of duality, we tend to think in black and white. Those are just 2 skin colors, but really there's a spectrum of, I don't know, a couple thousand different skin colors, and they occur throughout the world. And so not only are we looking at ethnic inclusivity, we're also looking at inclusive belief systems. So you'll see imagery from religious beliefs in northern African continent, right? Like the Egyptians, Sumerians, Canaanite. You'll also see imagery that come from Central and South America. You will see imagery from Europe, and even within Europe, there's a fair amount of diverse belief systems. Northern Europe versus the Celtic lands versus Southern Europe, right? Rome, Italy, and Greece. And then Eastern Europe, right, where we've got quite a lot more diversity. The American native beliefs are represented fairly well here too, which is kind of neat. This is, I mean, the imagery and art is just beautiful. And these cards have a great feel to them. The energy on them is very, I don't know what I would call this. I don't know, elevated and wise. I like the way they feel. They feel welcoming compared to other decks that maybe you don't quite vibe with well. I feel like this deck has a great vibe to it. And then the world is literally the world, which I like. That's neat. Oh yeah, sorry, Asian representation. And that's one that you don't see a lot. Asian cultures represented in tarot. And I'm not sure why that is. So again, we tend to think in black and white, but there are so many other degrees, right, of diversity there. And the cool thing is that in the so in the minor arcana, where she gets into the suits, she has different ethnicity for different suits, right? So the swords all have sort of an Asian or East Asian feel to them, right? The staves, she calls them staves, but these are the wands, right? These are going to have an African feel to them, right? So you're going to see imagery from African religions, peoples, the continent, belief systems. So like even within the African continent, there's hundreds of different belief systems, right? So just to say that, oh, representing people from Africa, but where in Africa, right? Like that's important, okay? And then the cups are going to be European imagery, right? So like within that, and I think that this is including the UK as well into that, which is technically not part of Europe, but it's being included here. So Northern European, Celtic, Eastern European, you see a lot of really neat imagery here as well, okay? And then sacred circles, which those are our pentacles or coins, these are Native American to the American continent. So if you can see here, not just North American, there's some Central American and even a little bit of South American in here, which this is cool. I fucking love this idea. And I think that if more decks took this approach, I think that that would be a huge step forward towards to undoing the whitewashing of tarot decks in general, but the magical community, the witchcraft community, the divination community, the tarot community, the psychic community, a lot of it is whitewashed. This card just dropped. I just did a read inadvertently for myself, the 5 of Sacred Circles. So yeah, this is a cool deck. It's the Ancestral Path Tarot. So if you want to check it out, it is back in print. It was made, it looks like probably 15 years ago was when it was originally in print, as far as I could tell. And it is now back in print after not being available for a while. So I highly recommend you check it out, especially if you're going to be reading for diverse populations, which pretty much everyone should be. Unless you only ever talk to white people or people with the same skin color as yourself. I highly encourage you to look into getting a more diverse tarot deck, and Ancestral Path Tarot is definitely one to check out. All right, well, I gotta go and start getting shit done here today, but thanks for joining me. Thanks for exploring the shadow self once again, and maybe I'll be back tomorrow. Have a good one, guys.